Picture a single corporate balance sheet so large it feels like a macro indicator. In South Korea, that line gets blurry. In 2012, Reuters noted that Samsung's quarterly revenue was roughly equal to around a fifth of the country's GDP. An easy comparison to misunderstand. Revenue is not the same thing as value added. But when the sales of one group can be spoken about in the same breath as national output, investors should hear a warning bell. Samsung is not a phone company that got lucky. It is the country's industrial nervous system. Chips, displays, shipbuilding, insurance, construction pieces that show up everywhere until something breaks. Reuters has described Samsung as having almost 60 affiliates and accounting for about one-fifth of South Korea's exports and stock market value. When a firm sits at that junction of trade, capital markets and employment, shocks don't stay contained. Markets price that reality every day, anchor it in numbers. Samsung Electronics reported 302.23 trillion won in full-year revenue for 2022, according to its FY 2022 results announcement. South Korea's government, by comparison, ran expenditure of 35.2% of GDP in 2023, according to the OECD. Big state, big corporate, same small peninsula. So how did a business that began as a 1938 trading shop selling staples end up as a national risk factor? And what does that concentration mean the next time chips swing from boom to bust? The first thing to pin down is what that 20% actually is. Reuters wasn't saying Samsung literally produces one-fifth of Korea's value-added output in the way GDP is calculated. What Reuters reported in October 2012 was that Samsung's quarterly revenue, at that moment, was roughly equal to around a fifth of South Korea's GDP. That sounds like a technicality until you think about why people repeat it. Revenue is a blunt instrument, but it is also the fastest way to feel scale in your gut. A company can run sales that size because it sits inside supply chains, not beside them. That's the angle that matters for finance. Samsung is not one firm in the way Americans picture it. It's a cluster of affiliates and cross-holdings that threads through the equity market, trade flows, and hiring pipelines. Reuters was already calling it the Republic of Samsung back in 2007, describing nearly 60 affiliates and estimating the group accounted for about one-fifth of the country's exports and stock market value. Even if you haircut that to allow for cycle and measurement, it's still concentration you can't ignore. Now put hard recent numbers on the table. Samsung Electronics reported full-year revenue of 302.23 trillion won for 2022 in its FY 2022 results release. South Korea's public sector is not small either. OECD country notes show general government expenditure at 35.2% of GDP in 2023. Big corporate, big state, tightly interlocked incentives. If you want more videos that treat corporate power like a macro risk, detect, sourced, and built for investors, hit like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm there's demand for this level of work. And for transparency, every source cited in this video is listed in the description. In March of 1938, the origin story wasn't a lab, a patent, or a venture round. It was groceries. Encyclopedia Britannica describes Samsung's start as a small trading store in Taegu, today's Daegu, moving noodles and other basic goods produced around the city and exporting them outward. The Hoam Foundation's own history of the early business gets even more specific. The operation in Daegu exported local fruits and vegetables plus dried fish sourced from Pohang, and it even produced noodles using a flour mill and noodle-making machines. That detail matters because it tells you what Samsung was before it was Samsung, a logistics sandmargin machine. If you can buy, process, package, and move staples through unstable markets, you're learning the same discipline that later shows up in electronics and shipyards. Control the inputs, control the distribution. Don't get squeezed in the middle. Then the country breaks. Korea goes through war, shortages, disrupted ports, disrupted currency, disrupted everything. You don't get a clean corporate pivot in an environment like that. You get survival instincts sharpened into strategy. The moment the fighting eased, Lee Byung-chul didn't bet on luxury. He bet on what the country couldn't do for itself yet. C.J. Chaochtang's corporate history states that Chaochtang was founded in 1953 as the first manufacturing business of the Samsung Group, and that Korea began producing sugar domestically for the first time through that business. CJ's newsroom goes further, dating Korea's first sugar production to November 5, 1953, at a Busan factory, and even notes the plant's capability: 25 tons of sugar per day. Hoam Foundation's expansion history frames Chal Sugar as Korea's first sugar refinery since liberation from Japanese occupation, built in Busan under serious practical constraints. That's not a cute anecdote. It's industrial policy in the wild. Basic goods first, then scale, then move up the value chain. Britannica notes that after the Korean War, Lee expanded into textiles and opened the largest woolen mill in Korea. Korea Jungyang Daily points to 1954 as the year Lee established Chile Industries and built out the factory complex. Sugar and textiles look far from semiconductors, but they train the same muscles: capital-intensive plants, steady procurement, workforce discipline, relationships with banks and ministries, and a tolerance for thin margins until the volume turns the math in your favor. This is where American investors sometimes misread the story by treating it like an entrepreneurial fairy tale. South Korea's post-war climb wasn't only about individual genius, it was also about a state that decided growth was a security strategy. The World Bank's work on Korea's development experience describes an export-led model where incentives were structured to favor trade, and where the government played an active role in shaping industrial upgrading over time. Another World Bank staff paper on Korea's export-led industrial development lays out how the country pushed hard to build an industrial base, capable of producing for foreign markets, not just domestic consumption. In practical terms, that meant policy didn't just support business. It picked lanes, then rewarded the firms that could execute at scale. By the 1960s and 1970s, that model hardened into something that still defines Korea's corporate landscape. The Chaebol system, family-led conglomerates intertwined with national goals. A detailed policy history from the Peterson Institute for International Economics describes how the Park Chung-hee era escalated industrial ambition, including the heavy and chemical industry push that targeted strategic sectors and created planning structures to implement the program. The point isn't to romanticize it. The point is to understand how a company like Samsung could accumulate national responsibilities. When the state wants export capacity fast, it tends to rely on large controllable entities that can marshal capital and labor quickly. If you're listening for the financial mechanism, it's right there. Scale plus political priority equals access to credit, access to licenses, access to imports of machinery, access to protected domestic demand while export capability gets built. That's how you get a trading shop to become a manufacturing base, and a manufacturing base to become a platform. It also explains why Samsung's story is not easily copy-pasted into a mature US market. Korea was compressing decades of industrialization into a generation, and the country was willing to tolerate concentration as the price of speed. The uncomfortable part is that this bargain doesn't end when the success arrives. It becomes self-reinforcing. When one group proves it can deliver exports and jobs, it gains leverage. When it gains leverage, it can demand room to expand. When it expands, the national economy grows more exposed to its cycles. That loop started long before smartphones and memory chips. It started with dried fish and noodles, then sugar, then wool industries that looked modest until you recognize what they were really building. A corporate organism designed to survive chaos by owning more of the chain. The part that still makes your stomach tighten is what Samsung built after it stopped being a company in the normal Western sense. It's a web. Reuters described the Republic of Samsung as almost 60 affiliates, and said the group accounted for about 1/5 of South Korea's exports and stock market value. The Economist has put the export share even higher in some periods, writing that Samsung alone accounted for about 25% of South Korea's exports. Whichever figure you believe in a given year, the message is the same. The country isn't just hosting a champion, it's riding one. That's where vertical integration stops sounding like a strategy buzzword and starts looking like infrastructure. Samsung Electronics can sell the finished devices Americans recognize, but it also sits upstream where the bargaining power lives memory displays, components, manufacturing know-how, and the cash cycle that ties it together. Even the 20% of GDP line that scares people is rooted in that industrial footprint. Reuters reported in 2012 that Samsung's quarterly revenue at the time was roughly equal to around 1/5 of South Korea's GDP. Again, revenue isn't GDP. It's not value added. It's not the national account's identity. But it's a clean illustration of how much commerce can run through one corporate throat. You can watch that scale in the consumer market like a heartbeat monitor. According to IDC's worldwide quarterly mobile phone tracker, Samsung shipped 61.4 million smartphones in Q3 2024, an 18.8% global share, with Apple close behind. That's not dominance in the way a monopoly dominates. It's something more useful and more dangerous. Samsung is almost always in the top 2, which means it's almost always close enough to set industry tempo, pricing pressure, component demand, manufacturing ramps, inventory decisions. Every one of those choices ripples back into Korean trade data, Korean employment, Korean equities. Then you move one layer down, and it gets more geopolitical and consumer. Memory chips are where Korea's growth model has tended to show its teeth, and also its fragility. When memory is hot, the country looks like a machine. When memory prices crack, the whole macro narrative catches a cold. APS reporting on Samsung's 2022 results captured how quickly that can turn. The company described weakened global demand, and its semiconductor division's profit collapsed compared with the year before. That's not a niche corporate problem. That's a national exposure to a single global cycle. The AI boom just sharpened the stakes, because the chip story is no longer only about PCs and phones. High-bandwidth memory became a choke point for AI accelerators, and now it's a scoreboard. Reuters reported on January 13, 2026 that SK Hynix was the main HBM supplier to Nvidia and held a 61% market share last year, while Samsung had 19% and Micron 20%, citing Macquarie Equity Research. That one line tells you why Samsung can feel like a national security asset one quarter and a national anxiety the next, even inside Korea's own ecosystem. There are moments when Samsung is not winning the most strategically priced slice of the future. Reuters has also described Samsung's internal worry in plain language: a chip crisis, leadership reshuffles, and the pressure of catching up in HBM where SK Hynix has been dominant. For investors, that's not gossip. It's the sound of a conglomerate trying to defend the highest margin part of its empire while the global rules of technology trade are hardening export controls, subsidy races, supply chain reshoring, and the quiet question every finance minister asks: how much of our growth is tied to one product cycle we can't control? Even the stock market tells the story with uncomfortable clarity. Korea Herald reported that Samsung Electronics common shares accounted for 14.53% of the KOSPI's total market capitalization as of June 2025. If you re a global investor buying Korea exposure through index products, you're often buying a very specific bet on Samsung's execution, on memory pricing, on global electronics demand, on whether the next trade restriction hits components, tools, or customers first. That's the real answer to how a company that began by moving dried fish and noodles ends up controlling a chunk of a modern economy. It doesn't control it the way a ruler controls territory. It controls it the way a power grid controls a city, by being wired into everything that moves: exports, equity, wealth, hiring, industrial upgrading, national pride, national risk. And once you see it that way, the fear is not abstract, it's practical. If Samsung has a bad year, Korea doesn't just lose some corporate profit. It can lose momentum, narrative, and leverage at the exact moment the world is making semiconductors a geopolitical weapon. If you take one thing from this, make it a discipline about numbers. Samsung is 20% of the economy lands because it sounds like GDP math. But Reuters was comparing sales to output in a way that highlights scale, not a literal GDP contribution. That distinction isn't academic. Revenue can be huge while value added is smaller. GDP is trying to measure value created inside borders after inputs are netted out. Still, the uneasy part survives the correction. When Reuters can credibly frame Samsung as a group tied to a meaningful share of exports and equity market value, that's concentration that shows up in real portfolio risk, not just a headline. The second lesson is about how modern industrial power actually works. People imagine dominance as a single product that captures the world. Samsung's grip comes from sitting upstream and downstream at the same time: components, manufacturing, consumer devices, financial services, heavy industry, so the cash flows reinforce each other. When IDC tracks Samsung near the top of global smartphone shipments, it isn't just a consumer story. It's a demand signal that can pull on displays, memory, logistics, and CapEx. When the semiconductor cycle turns ugly, APS reporting on Samsung's profit collapse in chips isn't just earnings season. It's a stress test for a country whose growth model has been wired to tech exports for decades. Then there's the geopolitical layer investors can't afford to treat as background noise. Reuters reporting on the HBM races: SK Hynix leading, Nvidia supply, and Samsung trying to close the gap reads like industry coverage, but it also reads like national positioning. A single product category can shift trade balances, wage growth, tax receipts, and the tone of the equity market. When a local outlet like the Korea Herald reports Samsung as a huge slice of the KOSPI's market cap, it's another reminder that buying Korea often means buying Samsung risk. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. If the next global shock hits chips trade controls, a demand cliff, a supply disruption, does having a national champion like Samsung make South Korea safer, or does it make the whole country more fragile? If you want more voiceover investigations built like this, hit like and subscribe. It's the difference between quick takes and real work.